The freezing wind swept through downtown Chicago before sunrise, carrying bits of snow across the empty sidewalks as 38-year-old Daniel Carter adjusted the worn collar of his faded navy coat. One hand gripped a thin folder holding his resume, while the other held the tiny hand of his 9-year-old daughter, Emma. Today was supposed to change everything. After losing his warehouse supervisor job 3 months earlier, every dollar had disappeared into rent, electricity, and school expenses. His wallet now contained exactly one $20 bill, the last money standing between his family and another hungry night. That bill was meant to buy dinner after what Daniel prayed would be a successful interview at one of the city's largest logistics companies. Emma looked up with a hopeful smile that hid worries no child should ever carry. "Dad, after your interview, can we get pizza?" she asked softly. Daniel forced a smile despite the weight pressing against his chest. "If everything goes well today, sweetheart, we'll celebrate properly." They continued walking until they reached the entrance of a quiet subway station, where an elderly woman sat alone on a piece of cardboard. Her clothes were soaked from melting snow, her hands trembled from the cold, and a small paper cup beside her held only a few coins. Most commuters hurried past without making eye contact. Some pretended not to notice her existence at all. Daniel slowed his steps. He reached into his pocket, feeling the crisp $20 bill between his fingers. It was everything he had. Emma noticed the hesitation in his eyes and whispered, "Daddy." "That's all our money." For several silent seconds, Daniel stared at the woman, remembering the nights after his wife passed away when strangers had quietly helped him with groceries and warm meals without asking for anything in return. He took a deep breath, walked over, and gently placed the bill into the woman's shaking hands. Tears instantly filled her eyes as she looked at him in disbelief. "Sir, this is far too much," she whispered. Daniel smiled with calm sincerity. "Maybe today you need it more than we do." Emma looked worried but stayed silent, trusting her father even when she couldn't understand his decision. The woman squeezed the bill tightly and said something almost too quietly to hear. "You have no idea what you've just done." Daniel simply nodded, wished her well, and continued toward the towering glass headquarters where his interview awaited. He had no way of knowing that by sunset his kindness would become the most important decision of his life. And when the boardroom doors opened the following morning, the face waiting inside would stop every heartbeat in the room. Long before unemployment became part of his life, Daniel Carter had built a reputation as someone who never complained, no matter how difficult the circumstances became. For 12 years, he worked at a regional distribution warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago, often arriving before sunrise and leaving long after dark. His supervisors trusted him with the toughest shifts because they knew he would always finish the job without making excuses. Every paycheck had a purpose. The mortgage, groceries, school supplies, utility bills, and the little savings account he hoped would one day help his daughter attend college all depended on his steady income. Then life changed in ways he could never have imagined. 4 years earlier, his wife Sarah lost her battle with cancer after months of expensive treatments that drained every dollar the family had managed to save. Her final request was simple: "Promise me Emma will always grow up knowing she's loved." Daniel made that promise with tears in his eyes, and from that day forward, every decision he made revolved around keeping it. He learned how to braid Emma's hair before school, pack lunches that looked cheerful despite their simplicity, and comfort her through nights when she quietly cried because she missed her mother. Although grief never disappeared, he buried his own pain behind encouraging smiles so his daughter would never feel alone. Just when he believed life had finally become stable again, the warehouse announced a major restructuring. Entire departments were eliminated, and experienced employees were dismissed without warning. Daniel walked out carrying a small cardboard box containing family photographs, a coffee mug Emma had painted for Father's Day, and the realization that 12 years of loyalty could disappear in less than 10 minutes. Weeks quickly turned into months as he submitted applications across the city. Some companies never responded. Others rejected him after brief interviews, saying they wanted someone younger, someone with different qualifications, or someone who better matched their corporate image. His savings slowly vanished. The family car needed repairs he could not afford, overdue notices piled up on the kitchen counter, and the landlord had already warned him that another missed payment could lead to eviction. Even so, Daniel refused to let bitterness take control of his heart. Every evening he sat beside Emma at the small dining table, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, and reminding her that difficult seasons never last forever. Deep inside, however, he carried a quiet fear he never admitted aloud, that one day he might run out of opportunities before he ran out of hope. The interview scheduled for that cold winter morning felt less like another job application and more like the final chance to keep the promise he had made to his late wife. The towering glass headquarters of Harrison Logistics rose above the busy streets like a symbol of opportunity, and Daniel Carter paused for a brief moment before stepping through the revolving doors. He straightened his old navy blue tie, took a slow breath, and reminded himself that confidence could never be measured by the price of a suit. The polished marble lobby reflected the morning sunlight, while sharply dressed professionals hurried between elevators carrying laptops and expensive briefcases. Daniel felt out of place, yet he refused to let insecurity show on his face. After checking in with the receptionist, he was directed to the 18th floor, where several applicants were already waiting outside the executive conference room. Most wore designer suits and confidently discussed their previous management positions, international projects, and business degrees. Daniel quietly took a seat in the corner, reviewing his notes one last time instead of joining their conversation. A few candidates glanced at his worn shoes before looking away with subtle smiles, silently deciding he wasn't real competition. Minutes later, the interview panel called his name. Inside the spacious boardroom sat 4 senior executives, each studying the resume placed in front of them. The questions began immediately. They asked how he handled workplace conflicts, reduced operational delays, managed inventory shortages, and motivated employees during stressful periods. Rather than reciting textbook answers, Daniel spoke about real situations from his years supervising warehouse teams. He explained how listening to workers often solved problems faster than issuing orders and how respect earned stronger results than fear. His responses were practical, honest, and backed by experience instead of impressive corporate language. For a few moments, even the interviewers appeared interested. Then the atmosphere shifted. One executive focused less on Daniel's qualifications and more on the gap in his employment history. Another questioned whether someone who had spent most of his career in a warehouse could adapt to a fast-moving corporate environment. A third politely suggested that the company was looking for candidates with a stronger executive background. Daniel answered every concern calmly without becoming defensive, but he could sense the decision slipping away. After nearly 40 minutes, the panel thanked him for his time and assured him they would contact him after reviewing all applicants. The words sounded professional, yet they carried the familiar tone of rejection he had heard too many times before. As Daniel walked back through the lobby, he caught his reflection in the glass entrance doors and wondered whether hard work still mattered in a world that seemed to value appearance over character. He climbed into his aging car with Emma waiting patiently in the passenger seat. She searched his face for good news before quietly asking, "How did it go, Dad?" Daniel forced a gentle smile, started the engine and replied, "I gave them everything I had." Neither of them realized that less than 24 hours later, the same company would call him back for a meeting that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel barely slept that night. Although he tried to stay optimistic for Emma's sake, he knew the interview had probably ended like so many others, with a polite handshake and an unspoken rejection. Early the next morning, while preparing a simple breakfast of toast and scrambled eggs, his phone suddenly rang. The caller ID displayed the name of Harrison Logistics. Daniel hesitated before answering, expecting another courteous message thanking him for his time. Instead, the receptionist spoke with unusual urgency. "Mr. Carter, the executive board has requested your immediate presence. They would appreciate it if you could arrive within the next hour." Confused but hopeful, Daniel promised he would be there as quickly as possible. After dropping Emma off at school, he drove toward the company's headquarters, replaying every question from the interview in his mind. He wondered if they needed additional documents or perhaps wanted another round of discussions. None of the possibilities prepared him for what was waiting upstairs. The atmosphere inside the building had changed completely. Employees who had seemed relaxed the previous day now hurried through the hallways carrying folders, whispering to one another with visible tension. Security officers stood outside the executive floor, while assistants moved quickly between offices making last-minute preparations. Daniel was escorted directly to the largest boardroom, where nearly every senior executive was already seated around the long polished table. Unlike yesterday, no one appeared confident. Several board members repeatedly checked their watches, while others quietly reviewed documents without speaking. The room felt unusually heavy, as though everyone was waiting for a decision that could reshape the company's future. Before Daniel could ask why he had been called back, the conversation stopped. The enormous wooden doors at the far end of the boardroom slowly opened. Every executive immediately rose to their feet. Daniel followed their gaze toward the entrance, expecting to see the chairman or a famous business leader. Instead, his heart nearly stopped. Walking into the room with calm confidence was the same elderly woman he had helped outside the subway station less than 24 hours earlier. The worn coat and knitted gloves were gone. She now wore an elegant charcoal business suit, her silver hair neatly styled, and a simple diamond brooch rested on her lapel. Her posture carried quiet authority, and every step reflected complete confidence. The transformation was so remarkable that Daniel questioned whether he was imagining the entire moment. The woman paused briefly as her eyes met Daniel's. A warm, knowing smile crossed her face before she continued toward the head of the table. The chairman stepped forward and addressed the silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "it is my privilege to introduce the person who officially assumes leadership of Harrison Logistics today, our new Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Evelyn Brooks." A wave of astonishment swept through the boardroom. Daniel stood frozen, unable to process what he was witnessing. The woman who had accepted his final $20 on a freezing sidewalk was now the most powerful person in the company, where he had come searching for nothing more than a chance to earn an honest living. Silence settled over the boardroom as Evelyn Brooks remained standing at the head of the long conference table. Every executive watched her with complete attention, while Daniel struggled to understand how the woman he had met on a freezing sidewalk could now be leading one of the largest logistics companies in the country. Evelyn slowly looked around the room before placing a small leather folder on the table. "Before we discuss the future of this company," she began in a calm, steady voice, "there is something every person in this room deserves to know." The directors exchanged puzzled glances. They had expected a speech about financial targets or corporate strategy, not a personal story. Evelyn pressed a button on the remote beside her, and the large screen behind her displayed several photographs taken over the past week. In every image, she appeared dressed as the same homeless woman Daniel had encountered. Some pictures showed her sitting outside train stations, others outside shopping centers, office buildings, and busy intersections. The room fell even quieter as the executives realized what they were looking at. Evelyn explained that after being appointed by the board as the company's next chief executive officer, she had postponed her first official day for one reason. She wanted to understand the values of the community her company served and the character of the people who hoped to become part of it. Instead of reading reports or attending meetings, she chose to leave behind her title, expensive clothes, and public identity. For 7 days she lived as an ordinary homeless woman, speaking to no one about who she really was. Hundreds of people passed by every day. Some looked away, others laughed, complained, or acted as though she were invisible. A few tossed loose coins into her cup without saying a single word, but only one person stopped long enough to ask if she was all right. Only one person treated her with genuine dignity instead of pity. Evelyn looked directly at Daniel before continuing. "That man is standing in this room today." Every eye immediately turned toward him. Daniel lowered his head, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Evelyn smiled gently and continued, "He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He believed I would never see him again. Yet he gave away the last $20 in his wallet because he believed another human being needed it more." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the room. "Yesterday, Mr. Carter walked into this building believing he was being evaluated by us. The truth is, long before his interview even began, he had already demonstrated the one quality that cannot be taught in any business school: true character." Several executives shifted uneasily in their chairs, remembering how they had quietly judged Daniel's appearance only hours earlier. Evelyn closed the folder in front of her and spoke with quiet conviction. "Resumes reveal experience, interviews measure knowledge, but integrity only appears when no one believes they're being watched. That is why yesterday's most important interview did not happen inside this boardroom. It happened on a cold sidewalk, where compassion was worth far more than any answer written on a resume." Not a single person spoke after Evelyn Brooks finished revealing the truth. The silence inside the boardroom felt heavier than any presentation or financial report the executives had ever witnessed. Faces that had carried confidence only moments earlier now reflected embarrassment and disbelief. Several senior managers avoided looking toward Daniel, remembering how quickly they had dismissed him because of his inexpensive clothes and modest background. Evelyn allowed the quiet to linger before walking slowly around the conference table. She wasn't interested in humiliating anyone. She wanted every person in that room to understand the lesson they had almost missed. She stopped beside the large display screen and pressed another button on the remote. Security footage from the previous afternoon appeared before everyone. The recording showed Daniel and Emma approaching the subway entrance after leaving the interview. The video captured every detail: the freezing wind, the nearly empty paper cup, and Daniel reaching into his pocket before placing his final $20 bill into Evelyn's trembling hands. There was no audience applauding him, no camera crew filming the moment, and no expectation of recognition. It was simply a father choosing compassion over convenience. The room remained completely still as the recording ended. Evelyn turned toward the executives and folded her hands. "Yesterday, many of you evaluated Mr. Carter based on a resume, an old suit, and a gap in his employment history," she said. "None of you knew that before he entered this building, he had already passed the most important leadership test I could have designed." Her words landed with undeniable force. A company can teach software, management systems, and operational procedures. It cannot teach a person to care about others when there is nothing to gain. She then faced Daniel directly. "Mr. Carter," she said with a warm smile, "may I ask you one question?" Daniel nodded quietly. Evelyn continued, "You believed you had failed the interview. You had only $20 left, a daughter depending on you, and no promise of another opportunity. Why did you give that money away?" Daniel took a slow breath before answering. "Because I kept thinking about how my wife used to say that kindness means the most when it's difficult. If I walked away knowing I could have helped, I wouldn't have been able to respect myself. Money can be earned again. Losing your humanity is much harder to recover." The honesty in his voice filled the room with emotion. Even those who had questioned his qualifications lowered their heads in reflection. Evelyn smiled proudly before addressing the board one final time. "This company has spent years searching for people with impressive credentials," she said. "From today forward, we will also search for something far more valuable: integrity. Skills build successful businesses, but character builds organizations people can trust." The directors slowly rose from their seats, not because protocol required it, but because they had just witnessed a lesson that no business textbook could ever teach. Daniel hadn't won their respect through wealth, influence, or titles. He had earned it through a single act of selfless compassion that changed the future of everyone in that room. The atmosphere inside the boardroom had completely transformed. The same executives who had questioned Daniel Carter's qualifications only a day earlier were now looking at him with genuine admiration. Evelyn Brooks returned to her seat at the head of the table, opened a folder containing several official documents, and smiled before speaking. "Mr. Carter, every company claims that people are its greatest asset," she said. "Unfortunately, many organizations forget those words the moment they begin making hiring decisions. I have no intention of leading this company that way." Her statement drew the full attention of everyone present. She continued, "Yesterday you came here hoping for a job. Today I want to offer you something much greater than employment. I want to offer you the opportunity to help reshape the culture of this company." Daniel looked completely speechless. He had prepared himself for another rejection, not for a conversation that could redefine his future. Evelyn slid the folder across the polished table until it stopped in front of him. "Inside is an offer for the position of Director of Operations," she explained. "The role includes a competitive executive salary, comprehensive health benefits, performance bonuses, and full authority to improve warehouse operations and employee development programs across every regional facility." Daniel stared at the documents without opening them, as though he were afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too quickly. Evelyn wasn't finished. "Your daughter Emma will receive a full educational scholarship funded by the Harrison Foundation until she graduates from college. In addition, the company will provide temporary housing assistance to ensure your family never has to worry about losing their home while you settle into your new role." A quiet murmur spread around the room. Even longtime board members hadn't expected such an extraordinary decision. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he struggled to find the right words. For months he had worried about rent, overdue bills, and whether Emma would have the opportunities she deserved. Suddenly, the future that had seemed impossible only yesterday was standing directly in front of him. After taking a moment to compose himself, Daniel finally spoke. "Ms. Brooks, I'm deeply grateful for your confidence in me, but if I accept this position, I'd like to make one request." The room became silent once again. Evelyn smiled with curiosity. "Go ahead." Daniel replied, "I'd like us to create a hiring program that gives opportunities to hardworking people who are often overlooked because of their age, appearance, employment gaps, or financial struggles. There are countless qualified individuals who never receive a fair chance." Evelyn's smile grew even wider. "That," she answered, "is exactly why you belong in this company." She extended her hand and Daniel accepted it with quiet humility. The board members rose to their feet, filling the room with sincere applause. At that moment, Daniel realized he hadn't been rewarded simply because of one generous act. He had been entrusted with something far more meaningful, the chance to prove that compassion and leadership could exist side by side, changing not only his own family's future, but the lives of countless others who would walk through those company doors after him. 12 months later, the story that had begun with a single $20 bill had become something far greater than anyone inside Harrison Logistics could have imagined. Under Evelyn Brooks' leadership and Daniel Carter's guidance, the company no longer measured success only through profits and quarterly reports. Every hiring manager received one simple instruction: never judge a person by appearance, financial status, or a difficult chapter in their life. As a result, hundreds of hardworking men and women who had once been ignored finally found careers instead of rejection. Daniel personally interviewed many of them, not searching for perfect resumes but for honesty, determination, and the willingness to work with integrity. Employees often said the company felt different now. People smiled more, respected one another, and understood that every individual deserved to be treated with dignity. Away from the office, life had become peaceful for Daniel and Emma. Their small apartment had been replaced by a warm home filled with photographs, laughter, and hope. Emma was doing well in school, making new friends, and chasing dreams that had once seemed impossible. Yet despite his promotion, Daniel never allowed success to change who he was. Every morning before work, he reminded himself of the freezing winter day when he had walked through the city carrying nothing but a resume, a frightened heart, and $20 that represented his family's final hope. That memory kept him humble, reminding him that circumstances can change overnight, but character should never change at all. One evening, after finishing work, Daniel and Emma decided to take a walk through the same neighborhood where their incredible journey had begun. As they passed the old subway entrance, Daniel noticed a young father sitting alone on a bench with his little son. Their clothes were worn, and a small backpack beside them suggested they had nowhere else to go. The man looked exhausted, trying to comfort his child while quietly hiding his own fear. Without hesitation, Daniel walked over, introduced himself, and invited them to dinner. Before leaving, he handed the father his business card and said, "Come to my office tomorrow morning. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise you a fair opportunity." Tears filled the man's eyes because, for the first time in months, someone had looked at him with respect instead of pity. As they continued walking, Emma slipped her hand into her father's and smiled. "Mom would be proud of you," she whispered. Daniel looked toward the evening sky, holding back tears that carried both gratitude and remembrance. "Everything we have today began with one choice," he replied gently. "Kindness doesn't make life easier overnight, but it makes the world better one person at a time." The camera slowly pulled away as father and daughter disappeared into the glowing city lights, leaving viewers with a truth that would stay in their hearts long after the story ended. Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive only after we choose compassion over fear. Money can disappear, opportunities can come and go, but a generous heart has the power to change lives forever, including your own.